Hi everybody. Today I chat with Zach Hawtof, co-founder and CEO of Tightknit, a platform that takes community building inside Slack to a whole new level. We cover how he got started in the exciting world of B2B and the various paths he took towards becoming an entrepreneur. Now this is a really great chat that touches upon community building. It's one of those topics that is happening during a time when online communities are either too fragmented or too siloed behind walled gardens, or in some cases just made obsolete because of AI. So it's a really fun chat and it covers a lot of interesting topics. So let's get started. Zach, it's great to chat with you. For those of you watching or listening, Zach and I crossed paths at Salesforce many years ago, and and Zach has been doing a lot of interesting things around the community since then, and that's partly why I wanted to pick his brains and just chat about all kinds of fun stuff that is going on. So thank you, Zach, for joining. And yeah, as always, I like to start by asking, what do you do? Who are you?
Yeah, no, thanks, KIRUPA. Thank you for having me. It's exciting to, catch up with you. So yeah, my name's Zach Hawtof. I am the CEO, co-founder, and community manager for a company called Tightknit. We help build a community platform for Slack. So we primarily serve B2B companies that want to build customer communities inside of Slack, whether it's gamification, events, forums, SEO, AI agents, all the things one needs to build a great unified community experience. So that it's a long story of how I got that, right? And I think we'll cover a little bit of that. But, Karup and I met when I was at Salesforce years ago. I was started as engineer, left as director of product of what was called the Experience Cloud. Before that, it was called the Community Cloud. So I've been in the community space for a very long time. And yeah, I'm excited to chat more about that, and as well as like anything going on in your world too.
Yeah, no, definitely want to touch about the community angle of it a bit, because that's something that I care about a lot and have had to fight all the various systems that make community building so difficult in this new world of where you have limited attention, you have a lot of products that are competing for it, and then people also just, the definition of community has shifted greatly from back then as well. But before that, though, I like to always go with the very beginning, Zach. You're working in tech, you're working in community building, all of that. What was the motivation? How did you get started? What was your first time where you were like, you know what, I want to work with computers, I want to work with tech, I want to do all these things?
Yeah, so I was very lucky that my dad worked at HP as his first like real job. So my dad was in tech sales. He started as like an electrical engineer, kind of missed that computer science wave of like where that was going to go, but he jumped into tech sales at HP and, always worked at like kind of tech adjacent businesses. Funny enough, Krupa, my dad did go to a Dreamforce like way back in the day, like well before you and I probably would have been able to go to one of those. So, but we had a computer at home. I was always on the computer, like one of those 90s kids that just kind of like saw it and was like, wow, there's so much going on. And the internet was just kind of getting started and all of that. I can still make all those jokes about like reading through Encarta, like just being able to get content at scale and like search for things was a huge thing for me. And then I ended up, getting excited about websites. The first, like what I can remember, the first time I like tried to get into building websites was with Dreamweaver. I don't know if you ever used Dreamweaver back in the day.
I still use Dreamweaver, by the
You
way. Even
still use
today, I
Dreamweaver.
still use
Oh, I love
Dreamweaver.
to hear that. I don't even know what Dreamweaver looks like now, but yeah, back then it
I
was
mean,
like,
they haven't updated. It still says 2021 or something. So every new year, I'm going like, the core part of my tech stack is going to be, going away at some point in the future from like an OS update or something that changes. But yeah, it's as you'll find out later, Zach, I live a very dangerous life where all
yeah.
my danger is on the tech tools I build my everything on.
Wait, you're telling me that you have sites still built on Dreamweaver today?
Yeah, absolutely. It started off using, the free versions of the browser tools, Netscape Composer, Front Page Express, which came with like Internet Explorer and
Right.
Netscape. And I started off using that. And then I switched over to Front Page because they had this thing called server extensions, which meant that on your server, they could automatically do before PHP and, I
Right.
think CGI was part of it, but, it was all abstracted away. I could just build things without really having any idea how it worked, but it basically locked you into any kind of a server plan that had the front page server extensions as a part of it. And so that went on happily for a very long time. And there were things like server-side includes, which front page called the include page component. So I was able to templatize my page because there was no CMS back then when I started off.
Yeah.
And so for me, every new page I create is a file, save as of an existing page, and I change the title and things like that. And so except for like the header and footer and common elements, the entire thing is like a little duplicate copy of all these things. And I created way too much content over the years where I can't go back and recreate all of this and modernize it and so on. And when front page was killed off and then Expression Web became its replacement, and I was on the Expression team at Microsoft where I was right next to the team that built all of this. I'm like, okay, I'm right in the middle of like working on something that is core to what I'm, always interested in. And then that, of course, went away as well. And Dreamweaver is the only one left at this point. And I'm also, knowing full well that the road for that is not never ending. I can see a cliff at the edge of it. I just don't know where it is. But yeah, it does terrify me every now and then, Zach.
That's amazing. I truly think you're one of the like only people I know that still actually probably has touched Dreamweaver in a decade. Like that's the I'm impressed. Yeah. I'm impressed it's still even running on the operating system. So that's.
I mean, it barely runs. I'll tell you that because that save at least like inserting images now doesn't work as used to be. At least it used to be like I'm going to make a relative path. Now it's like hard coded to my full hard drive. I have to go and manually tweak these kind of things. All the modern support for like CSS variables and so on, not supported. So when I open up a document I created, I have to like actually paste in some like actual hard-coded values so it knows how to render it. It's not even using like a modern browser.
It's still trying to figure out if Flash is installed. You're like,
it probably is, exactly. It's probably trying to figure out like, let me get a preloader set up for you. So if you're on like IE4, you'll get this ActiveX object, and if you're not, you'll get like this JavaScript object.
I mean, I love this tangent. Like that is an amazing thing to learn that you are still on Dreamweaver, and I am terrified for you.
And you're gonna have to figure out. I pay for a web host. I pay for a server. I pay like $8 a month now because all I need is FTP access and Apache installed for server-side includes, and that's it. I don't need anything else. Like if I need something, I have a PHP PHP and a MySQL database that I need, but all that stuff is like no longer needed.
And so I will say, you were probably far more technical as a young person than I was. I was still trapped in the HTML and CSS of it all, which kind of worked out because I ended up being primarily a front-end engineer right after that. But like that was I wish I could go back and, after you've read, Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 Hours, you're like, dang, if only I had actually gone back and worked a little harder on just not.
No. I think you focus on all the right things here. So I think you're just fine.
Okay. All right.
One of the argument that if I was tech savvy, I wouldn't be using like Dreamweaver and front page and using server extensions and like the include page component, which is basically a Microsoft-centric wrapper on the server-side includes in Apache. So they could have said like, let's use Apache, it makes it portable. Of course, Microsoft plan was like, let's not make it portable. Let's have you always be tied into this. And It wasn't until my web host, Media Temple, emailed me saying like, of all of our customers, you're the only one that's using this front page server extension thing that we have for Unix. Is there any way you can get off of it so you can like, save time in migrating? I'm like, I didn't know that, but absolutely. Let me see what it's going to take to be able to do this.
Well, I'm going to have to, I'll go look at the code on your site later and just see.
I actually wrote a video and an article on exactly like how an article gets published on the website because people keep asking me this all the time. They're like, what do you do here? But I will say that in a world of CDNs that kind of like, make it easy to not have a more powerful server, and my forums are powered by Discourse, it's an entirely different instance altogether. So that is running on like a more modern stack. But within vBulletin, it was like PHP, MySQL, and all of that. But so there are parts of it that are more modern, but the core thing that all the content I create though, it's all very much old school.
Fascinating. I mean, I'm excited to see what becomes of the next transition for you. So anyway, your Dreamweaver was different than mine. I was building like let's see, at the time, I think I was building like an alt rock music site. That was like what I was trying to focus on was like, I could build can you still hear me, KIRUPA?
I can hear you just fine. I'm
just
like, talking to my daughter here.
Oh, no worries. And then, I mean, I had no plans to be in computer science. Like I actually so I went to Berkeley. I was headed as an econ major, but you're already hearing the word Berkeley and you're like, how did that guy not go into computer science? Well, that was obviously what happened, right? Like I got into Berkeley and I was like, all right, clearly these kids know something that I don't. And I just kind of like saw all of these incredible engineers that were so like thinking about like the future. And I was like, all right, I got hooked. So I basically swapped day one from being an econ major into a computer science major. And, you know, it kicked my ass. It's a very hard program. But it's funny because after like a year at Berkeley, you learn enough that you can be pretty dangerous
Yeah.
on the web. So, um, through a lot of the internships I worked on, first one was at a company called Cloud Elements, which later got acquired by UiPath. And then I worked at another company in San Francisco called, at the time, it was called Practice Fusion. Ended up getting acquired later on for other stories, is EHR system. And then after that was Salesforce, right? And actually that was like really the start of my career, was learning. Like I was one of the few kids that prior to 18 had heard of Salesforce only because of his own dad. Like I actually had some understanding of it. And I had an offer from Salesforce and Apple, and I didn't want to live in the peninsula. That was actually like one of the biggest reasons I went with Salesforce. Was I was like, well, if I could choose Salesforce, living in the city is so much easier. I don't have to commute. And really looking back on it, I'm like, I love that because we now live in a world where a commute over an hour and a half is just like, that's the
Yeah.
thing that we're all trying to avoid. So, really worked out, and that's kind of like how I ended up at Salesforce and working with you.
I mean, it's not just the geographic version of like, I want to live here and not there. And that was your decision between it. Somewhere along the way, you were like, I want to work in enterprise B2B. Like, that's what my future looks like. I look ahead, on like what's going to happen. That's where I want to be. Not consumers, not hardware, not cool tech. I want to work where hard problems with real money is.
You know how I actually describe it, and it's kind of you would almost think it's the opposite, but I actually think of consumer tech as more lonely, if that makes any sense, because your job is to create technology for potentially millions of people. There's no ability for you to really connect with those individuals the same way you can with like B2B technology, where some businesses have less than 100 customers. Like, you can connect with your customer in a way that you cannot with B2C tech. And like I'm very much a people person, and like the idea of building technology where you're like Mark Zuckerberg and 2 billion people are using your product, like that's not exactly what I wanted to go do. I wanted to actually like meet people, and I think B2B is like one of those. Ironically, you're like, oh, it's boring B2B, but I actually think it's so much more people driven than B2C tech, which is where I thrive.
That's actually a great way of describing it. You're right. The high touch connection is great if you're a people person, which you are, and B2B is the place for that.
Yeah, if you're an analytics brain, which I am not that person, go B2C. Like that's I one of my pieces of advice to a lot of like B2C PMs versus B2B PMs. I'm like, B2C PMs, you got to be good at data. You have to understand analytics, you have to understand A/B testing, you have to kind of understand experimentation. Like you are making decisions based on massive numbers of individuals, and understanding experimentation will be kind of part of that play. B2B, it's kind of funny. You can talk to, if you just go out and talk to 25, 30 of your customers, you end up discovering a majority of the problems with the business just by going and speaking to them. So I tell like a lot of people, if you want to be a B2B PM, you have to be speaking to your customers all of the time. Because especially nowadays, right? With you think of like the whole growth of what AI is going to do to the product management space. But I'm like, you have to be thinking about marketing, you have to be thinking about like problems, sales, all of that as a product manager, because you either go that direction or you're developing more tech faster, or both. Because realistically, we're running into this world where we're all getting squeezed and squeezed because we can all scale now 10x.
So how did you make that decision to go down this path? a part of me is like you're graduating from Berkeley and you already have it all well defined. You know exactly what you're going to do. You have the exact same articulated point of view of why you want to do these things.
Yeah, I mean, some advice I got, which is I always knew I was going to join a startup, and you'd say, "Oh, why would a guy who wants to join a startup join Salesforce? A clearly not a startup." And I think some really interesting piece of advice that I got was, you have this opportunity to join like a big name business that has done it right for so long, and it's a great logo to have on your resume. And you're saying, I say that, and it actually is so meaningful nowadays. So like one of the things that I can always go back to is say, look, I helped build the communities for Google, Disney, and Home Depot. How many of my like fellow community leaders can say that they were part of those platforms? Right? Like that is, I have seen the peak of what an enterprise community platform looks like. So now in our current space, as a small business delivering community platforms, nothing scares me as they get bigger and larger. We're now SOC 2 Type 2 compliant earlier than most of our competitors because we understood that that was going to be a requirement so early on.
Yeah.
And I think that's something you can really only learn in a big business is how things end up, if that makes sense. It's not a startup, right? You're not pushing at the same scale, but you can see how things end up. And when you go to a startup, you don't get to get in that rhythm. There's not a strong rhythm in startups. You don't have a cadence. You don't have a day to day. I don't know if do you guys cuss on this platform, but I
Yeah, you can
all
cuss.
right.
It's
Shit is changing every freaking day. Like you are constantly dealing
yeah.
with fires. It is just part of the lifestyle and it's exciting for sure, but it's something that I think if you're trying to figure out what fits you, it's good to do both. It's not like one is more virtuous or moral than the other. They're both good jobs in different ways. And I think that helped me as I went from, a massive B2B company. I jumped to a Series B and now I'm in a small business where I'm at the top of the point here. And that's a total different landscape change. And I think I've gotten to see how each of these businesses operate at each scale. And it really does teach you how to build a better business from the ground up.
But you're running a startup right now, and in some ways, do you feel like the kind of description you used of like startups as being very spontaneous, not a little bit of like unpredictable and all of that? Does it also apply to you, or do you think that in this case, because you have all this experience having worked at companies and seeing like how well run organizations are typically operating, that you're able to kind of balance out some of the usual high speed chaos that startups bring with them?
I think we have a strong understanding of what's next, and that's lucky, right? Like I think, if you start at a startup and you never get to see what's next, you're guessing the whole time, right? But like we know where we're going to be in 5 years. Like I can see what's going to happen, right? We are going to be the number one enterprise B2B community platform on the market. I know what that looks like. I know what we need to build to get there. And I know who I need to hire in order to make that happen because I've been there before. And I know what I need to do in order to do it. And I know where the problems were in the previous job. I know where we went wrong. I know where, we got distracted. We even have built things, KIRUPA, like where we had solved this problem at Salesforce and we had to later change it because it didn't match the needs. So we knew up front what and how we should build it so that we wouldn't have to migrate it in the future. Right. And like that comes with experience, right? Like not like there are a lot of new companies. There's no previous example of those companies. So it's like very hard for me to imagine some of these AI companies are truly innovative. That is one of the hardest companies to build is a truly innovative business where there's no like incumbent that you're beating. You're basically creating a market that did not previously exist. And it's hard. I mean, that's a really hard space to be in because no one can really give you guidance. You're the first mover into that. But we are not a true, and I say this actually proudly, right? We're not a true AI company. We're an applied AI company. We solve a human problem, and I'm definitely going to use AI to do it. But AI is not how I pitch our company. We are building with AI to solve a problem that could not be solved. I do not care, and neither do my customers care if I'm an AI company if I can solve the problem better than they had it before.
So, what exactly does your company do?
Yeah, great question. So let me first describe the problem. I think that's a good way to start. So Slack is a very popular community platform, and it has been almost since the beginning. But if you ask anyone on the Slack team or anyone who's on like you using Slack as a community platform, they'll tell you Slack is not a community platform. And yet, it is the most popular community platform in the market today. So 25% of all communities are built on Slack. And so when we said, all right, we want to go build the next generation of a community platform, we realized instead of trying to rip people out of where their members want to be, where they actually want to collaborate, what if we could bring the community platform to you? So we built Tightknit inside of Slack. It's a native Slack application and a web platform powered by Vercel that allows you to build forums, events, gamification, onboarding, AI agents, all inside of Slack. And so now, as a community, you don't have to sacrifice leaving Slack in order to actually build your space. And I think that's the really big win, is being able to see customers finally go like that deep breath of, oh, I don't have to leave Slack now. I now can bring the community to me rather than try to rip all of my 2,500 plus members into a new system that they've never used before and hope for the best that things are going to work out.
That is very cool. So, are you an app inside Slack, or are you taking the Slack data and users and building a layer on top of it?
Both. So we are both an app in Slack and a essentially, like you've mentioned, almost like an OEM layer. We take Slack and turn it into a community platform. So some examples for us. So if you go to community.clay.com or community.mixpanel.com, you'll actually see Tightknit operating for those communities. And those are some of our fastest growing communities on the platform, because what they've been able to do is take all this incredible content and deliver it into a customized forum. And so it's really a new layer of thinking about Slack less as a both literal and metaphorical black box, and turning it into a full-on, almost like a Slack CMS, a digital layer that can sit outside of Slack and power the growth and marketing tools for your business.
Yeah, very cool. And so I just went to community.clay.com. I'm going to join the community. I'm joined the Slack group. And then from there, it also, the source of truth is still going to be Slack and the permissions and whatever the organization might have specified for who is allowed and not allowed. But once you're in, you now have the option of interfacing with the content in a nice way through this more community focused user experience, as opposed to the Slack's more chat based real time experience.
Yeah, I mean, we do say we're the first modern conversational forum, if that makes any sense, right?
Yeah.
So like you've got, your old school forums, the ones that you've got like on Discourse, where it's like you come in, you post, you wait 4 hours, you get an email, you come back, you post again, right? That's how forums have existed since you've been on Dreamweaver. Like
Yeah.
the
I
longest amount
still
of
do
time.
it even today. Even today, I have a discourse forum. It's exactly how it operates.
Right. And then there was this new generation of communities that kind of came out almost around when like Slack and IRC channels just started to form, is you could create these conversational communities, right? These spaces where you could actually collaborate with others in real time. And so you have your Slacks, your Discords, your WhatsApps. Those are all, large community platforms. And what we've realized is you need to have both. It's not like you should only have one or the other. What you do need is a conversational space, which is truly best built for this future AI world, right? We want to have it where you can collaborate with agents and humans and solve problems. And you can also meet people in personalized new ways in real time. Great answer to kind of the future world we live in, where 24-hour SLAs are just not what we need to promise for our customers anymore. So that's one side. And then the other side digital forums are amazing for discovery. And no matter what people are saying, Google is not going away anytime soon. The last, it is still growing massively from a Google search perspective. And not only that, AI LLMs like actually do learn from scraping the internet. And so all of that content needs to be discoverable somehow. So if you have all this amazing content locked away in your chat systems, how do you expand that in this future AI world where you like the how do I put this? The value of a business in the future is how much awareness and discovery is out there, right? You want to be part of these LLM answers. You want to have your content and your information out on the web. And whether we like it or not, right? LLMs still work on Web 2.0. That is how they train. That is how they discover. That is how they grow. That is how they'll continue to grow until there's some new layer that allows human discovery to advance. So anyway, that's my long-winded story of how those two things are all connected.
No, that makes a lot of sense to me because because I do run a forum and I've seen the ups and downs of it over the years, I can see that the current model of how forums run is definitely not for new users. It's like, if you're kind of nostalgic for the old way of doing things, you're probably going to do this. Otherwise, you're going to join a Discord community or a Slack community or Reddit or something like that, where the real timeness is almost like expected as a part of it. As people are probably less patient now than they were back then. And so for them, there's an opportunity to like get an answer quickly as opposed to waiting for a period of time. You're not going to take the less shorter, longer path. And also the idea back then was forums were great because they were a community in their own ways. People with different interests kind of came in, they congregated on a common topic, and they just had fun. This is before there was Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook wasn't really a big thing. All of these like isolated communities are on specific interests didn't quite exist. Whereas before, when I look at my forum specifically, it has about 20,000 members and, not as active as it used to be, but people still post on a regular basis. The kind of things that people post about now are very transactional. Whereas before it was kind of like, hey, just got back from school and like I'm playing this video game, what's going on? That kind of a conversation now either happens with your real life friends on Facebook or it happens on a very specific gamer specific forum. So what has happened is like the it used to be broad communities were like broad in like topics and interests. All those individual topics now go deep into very specific silos. LinkedIn for your career and profile, Dribble for like all your design kind of focused content. And so what has happened is like you've seen this bifurcation in some ways where community is no longer one thing, it's many things. And how do you kind of connect the dots across all of your community profiles?
Yeah, and I mean, even the word community can be a struggle for a lot of people, right? Like it can mean so many different things depending on who you're speaking to. And, I think what we have seen with social networks is that it's much more focused on audience building than connection and community, right? It's more about, and you can see this, right? Like TikTok is a great example of a social network that bypassed the groups concept. It just said, you know what, we're going to connect people to people they have never met before and create these massive audiences at scale that people can actually grow their business on. And I'm not saying an audience is not valuable. It's just different than a community, right? And what we used to have, I remember like the golden day of Facebook groups. That was amazing, right? It was like finally you had a space where you could create these niche kind of communities and actually facilitate and participate in them. And then, I don't know what happened, right? They had the momentum. I don't think there are still Facebook groups and they still exist today and they're still very much leveraged, but they're not at the same capacity that they were, at the time that I was using them. And then I'll make this argument. LinkedIn groups never got it right. I think that was a miss still today. And the fact they still even have it there is odd to me. But Reddit, I think, got this right. So Reddit ended up creating a space where you could essentially find these hyper niche groups and collaborate and comment and talk about problems and the trust building of the internet. I think we should talk a little bit about the future of SEO because I think it actually is important.
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah.
But Reddit ended up getting this really right. And you've seen the growth of Reddit as like a trusted source for content and for people. But what I am finding is one of the downsides of Reddit is you as a business, you as a community, do not own your content, right? It is not white labeled. It is on reddit.com. And Reddit's goal is not to keep you on one community. Its goal is to expand you into many different ways.
Yep.
And so I think that is that's something that we're starting to see this next generation of. How do I take and own my community as a white labeled platform? How do I bring it back into our ecosystem and try to build a business where community is at the center of it? Because one of the things that I tell people is, look, technology is clearly no longer a moat. I have found, and we all talk about it now, right? The fact that these apps allow you to build tech so much faster. Last night I was at a Vercel V0 meetup, and we're watching it build the entire app during the
Yep.
call, right? Like, what's that going to look like in a year? What's that going to look like in 2 years? It's very clear that technology and application development is just going to go from these small hobbyist apps and continue to expand and expand and expand. So your distribution moat is actually going to be the big thing. Can you build a community as strong as KIRUPA can, right? Can you have people that have communities where for 27 years they've been relying on you? Because the future of businesses is thinking, is there a story involved? Is the brand itself something I trust? Is it something I know is going to survive? And is it something where even if they're not the first one to build the tool or the app, they're listening to me as the customer and they are going to get there. And I'm willing to work and wait with them because I so strongly connect with their story and what they're going to help me do as a business that I want to stay with that company. And that is what you should be thinking about, like when starting a company, is less about your tech, because tech clearly is going to get swapped out left and right.
Yep.
But can you build a platform? Can you build a place where people feel connected to actually sustaining a long-term business model with you?
I agree. I mean, even we also talk about stickiness. What is going to create sticky users in your world? It's, number one is like a personal connection. They know you, they know the company and all of that. The second one is a personal connection with other people that are also going to be a part of it, because you can always replicate the tech and replicate the look and feel of it, but you can't bring the people along. So whenever you talk about like acquiring companies and so on, it's like you can acquire the technology, great, but is the technology the reason why people are staying, or is the ecosystem it enables? If you have a platform of integrations, or you have a platform of like communities, that's really what the value is. If you look at like Stack Overflow being acquired by the private equity firm like several years ago, I'm pretty sure they didn't buy it for like basically Discourse, their free open source software that you can use for it. It's really the network effects of like this large community of people that are like pretty much like invested so much of themselves into it that they're going to keep coming back because the sunk cost is huge. Even if something brand new comes up, it's like the center of gravity is already here. Unless it's something drastically game changing, I'm not going to change. I'm already happy being a part of this group and being part of this community. So I think that's very valid. You talked about, why did Facebook groups and like forums and all these things kind of decrease? I think there's a little bit of a world where back in the day, to create a forum or a place where someone needs to go, you need to have a little bit of more tech savviness. It wasn't a case where you can just go click a button and have it working. You kind of need to like understand like how to configure some server, get some database password and things like that. It wasn't a lot, but for the average person, it was more. So it was kind of like you had walled gardens where a handful of people created communities, and oftentimes it was in their particular style and how it needed to go. And so that's was like I'd say like the world, early days of like forums and what made it work. Then you have something like MySpace, where it's like, what? It doesn't matter what a central authority says things should be. I can actually make it look like my own personality. My own personality is going to shine through in all of these things. And then you had like, then forums evolved a bit to have like theming and like even going to customize look and feel for their own purposes. But those were all just like, it's like, it's cool, but it's not truly mine. But it was still hard to build your own forum. And even if you built your own, how do you get people to actually start using it? So you always had to go to places where, large population centers, popular websites, popular destinations where people are going to be there. And then you try to create these things for yourself. But I think what we've seen with like Twitter and LinkedIn and so on is that it's no longer about a central authority having the visibility. Each individual can now be an authority of their own. Like they have their own persona, their own profile. So instead of them being a small part of a bigger community, they're a big part of many different communities. And you have your personal brand that you're now carrying around with you. Everyone talks about how many Twitter followers do you have? What's your LinkedIn, profile? There's a company called, I forget the name of it, they gave you a social media score based on how it was Crop, or maybe not Crop, but it was a very short name, but it would scan all your social media profiles and so on and give you a number that talked about like, how influential you were. And those were all things that people cared about. And that cannot be done when you're contributing everything to a community run by someone else or in some other organization. And I think that's where we saw this shift from like, centralized communities to this decentralized world where I'm going to be a top follower on LinkedIn or on Pinterest or in all these areas where the idea of like me building my own audience, I cannot do it on my own. I don't need someone else to like help me along the way. And what I find fascinating about what you're doing here is that the hardest part of many communities oftentimes is like, okay, what does day zero look like? How do I get the first person to post? How do I get people to sign up and so on? Whereas Slack is pretty much a community in its own way. People have been using it for a long time inside organizations. There's a large amount of content there. The day zero problem is, in some ways, in my opinion, is solved. It's like, yeah, all my existing Slack members are now part of the community. They're going to go about doing the things that they always have done. It just so happens to now be viewed through another UX layer of like the community lens of it. So if someone fresh is coming in, they're like, oh, this seems like a very buzzing, happening place, as opposed to a typical community where you're like, okay, I'm posting. It seems like only one person's been posting for the last 2 years straight. No, there's been no real response except for it's like random spammer that they didn't delete. And so I think what you're doing is like solves this problem very nicely by taking problems of the back in the day, providing a nice modern spin on it, but still connecting with the ultimate human desire to feel connected with the products in the community and things like that.
Yeah, and I mean, just elaborating more on what you're saying, like, a lot of people confuse, like, oh, this guy loves Slack. It's like Slack is the thing that he cares about. I'm like, no, 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 no. That's not what I'm after. What I'm after is the lowest friction way to create a community. Slack is that answer. I have a thesis that this is our belief, and this is why we're sticking to it. And it's why we've built our business around Slack. If it wasn't Slack, I would have gone a different direction. It's this like especially as a product thinker, or as even like a thinking customer first, your job is like what I tell everybody is like, if you want to build a business, especially in B2B, good example. If you want to build a business in B2B, your job is to think, how do I get my customer promoted? How do I give my customer more time? How do I get my customer to be a happier individual? And then you go figure out what to build. Like, do that first. Say, if there's nothing that you need to build in order to make that happen, do not build anything. Go and solve the problem, because I think people so often think they need to build the thing first in order to show that there's something viable here. But if you can create a services company that does this better, if you can even just create documentation and courses that does this better than a product ever could, go do that, because there is so much value to be created outside of products. Products are the last thing you should build. It's the final thing when you have no other options to go and build new tech. And that's why so many products still are built, is because there is this larger and larger circle, and products sit on the outside. But there's little dots of value all within this circle of kind of the life we live in. And you find so many business opportunities creating courses and content to teach people about products that already exist, new ways to use them. And that is a value opportunity in itself, right? And so I think that's where community really comes in, is it's all about learning and connection. And I've had many debates about which of those two things is more important. I think it's a useless debate, personally. I think it is one of those where some are connection and some is learning, right? They solve different problems in different statements. But that's where community kind of sits, is your job is to not show someone like how cool your product is. It is to show them how like your product can enhance their lives the way that it has enhanced other people's lives. And if you want to start building a community, a lot of people I run into think incorrectly. They're like, how do I get to 1,000 people? I'm like, I don't care if you get to 1,000 people. Get to one person. Solve that first one person problem. Can you get one person to give a shit about what you do? If you can do that, you can get 2 people to give a shit about what you do. And then 3 people. And then eventually I run out of fingers on my hand. And finally, you've got a community that actually actively cares about what you're building and is going to recommend you to others. And that is the growth model around community building that more people need to think about. Very often, they think of it as if they're like building an audience. They have to impress people. They have to show off. They have to do all these things. But the authenticity of giving someone your time and making a difference one step at a time is really how you build a strong network.
Yeah, that is 100% true. And the nice thing about communities is that the network effects often kick in. So with each person you bring in who's like convinced of the value that you're bringing in, they're going to bring in a handful of people of their own, and that's just going to strengthen the community overall. Like the flywheel effect for communities, often found, is probably much faster than like most other things you study about, products and things like that. So I think it's a great way of thinking about it. So before we get to the topic of SEO, I noticed that now you live in New York. So it seems like the concern about between like downtown San Francisco and East Bay and on all of that, or the peninsula, no longer applies. So what made you decide, what, I'm going to shift and I'm going to move to the other side of the country?
I mean, I think for me, it was truly to try something new. One of the, like, I'll say this as a tech guy, right? Like, one of the fun things about moving to New York is I got to say, oh, I used to work at this company called Salesforce. And more often than not, I was getting people go, what's that? And I'm like, oh my God, I'm outside of the bubble, right? Like, I
Yeah.
think that was just a more of a personal thing. The other thing is I see New York vastly growing in the startup space. And I do tell a lot of startup leaders there are some industries that I think are going to do better in the tech scene here than they will back in San Francisco. So obviously, if you're building an AI dev tools company, you're probably going to end up being an SF. There are a few in New York, but obviously the center of gravity is still very much in San
Yep.
Francisco. But I'm building a community company that happens to use AI, right? Yes, we are a tech company. We do serve B2B, but the number of individuals that I help are not sole like B2B providers, right? They are thinking about how to grow, and New York is very much of that like growth mindset. A lot of the businesses here are incredibly human first. They're super community driven because the people of New York are just very much built like that. You go out, you go see people, you go to events, you collaborate. And I do think that it is this new burgeoning tech scene for New York. And I'm really excited about being here kind of in that growth cycle of it.
No, that's really cool. I had a hunch that was going to be your answer, but because we talked about your decision on where you want to, basically set the first step of your career on geography, I just figured I'll bring it up one more time in this case.
No, I mean, thank you for, yeah, I'm a big fan of New York. I think if you're a founder trying to decide between San Francisco and New York, I love SF. I actually have nothing against SF. People that move to New York and leave SF, they're like, oh, I hated SF. I actually love San Francisco. I love New York and I love San Francisco. And they're both great times in my life. The thing that I think New York has that just cannot be beat is that energy. It's like the energy that you even know about without even living here. It is a nonstop energy. If you like that kind of energy and you like to be around those kind of people, this is a great place to be. If you like to, be a little more chill, it's probably best to stay in the Bay Area. Um, and I think that's the way I see. I mean, the technology market is going to constantly adapt and change, right? San Francisco will not be the hub of everything forever for tech. It will change and adapt and evolve, and that's just the way things operate. So I'm very bullish on the New York tech scene, is how you can see it.
Very cool. So let's talk about SEO. Let's talk about
Yes.
content and SEO.
Yeah, I mean, this is something, I mean, as someone who works at Google, this is also something I love to chat with you about. What we have found and what others have found as well. And, no one person I've learned ever, even I've spoken to many people at Google, no one person knows the algorithm of how content is decided. I think everyone thinks that like there's one person in Google who fully understands it all. That is not the case. There are hundreds of people that have their own algorithms running across all of tech inside of Google search. So but the one very noticeable thing that we have started to see is the downfall of like the niche blog world and the growth of the niche community world. And the reason that we have seen this start to happen is everybody and their grandmother can write a blog now. It's like it's a 5-second activity of write me a blog about X, Y, and Z and cover X, Y, and Z topics. And then it's built, it's done. And yes, we want to add new content. We want to add like that personal brand to it. But even that is starting to get like pushed away into these AI systems that begin to learn and write like us. So it's this very new landscape for content that we've started to actually go back to that authentic content of, who cares about pure grammar? And I'm sure people are freaking out right now about that. But like, that's kind of this new world we've moved into. Short little sentences, comments, replies, 100 threads, where we're actually exploring multiple viewpoints in real time, right? There's arguments, there's agreements, there's all sorts of elements of like a community conversation that it's not just a single viewpoint, it's multiple viewpoints. So you can balance all of the content with juxtaposing views. And Google's noticed that people like that. And they have started to move Reddit to the top, Quora to the top, even Stack Overflow to the top of Google search, as well as niche blogs. So someone got very excited about SEO and wanted to join us.
Yes. Pixel decided to make a
Oh, I
visit.
love that. Your cat's name is Pixel. But that's what's happened, right? So like and you and I search the same way. How often do you type in like a search space REDDIT
Yeah,
enter, right?
never.
It's the new search forum. And as a business, you want to be able to own more of the conversations around your business, to be able to generate more interest, to be able to show people that you're not just a discussion forum for answering questions. You are also running advocacy programs and learning programs, and you've got member directories to show off your partners and your ambassadors and all the different community programs that are outside of customer support. So like the fun thing about community is that about 30% of the time it's under the marketing team, about 30% of the time it's under the customer support team, and 40% is an other. But
Yeah.
that handshake deal is being done between community marketing and customer support for building a great platform that handles both. Because I think that is how customers operate. We solve our problem, and then we want to learn about the next thing. And then we solve that problem, and then we want to learn about the next thing. And I think I'm trying to make sure that department leaders do not like create this dichotomy of the goals there, because bringing those two things together is so much more powerful than leaving them apart.
Yeah, and also there's an authenticity element as well in with community specifically. When I look at a blog post or something, I'm like, at this point, I'm like, it's by AI generated, or it goes through like 8 rounds of reviews for all personalities stripped out of it. There's always, you have to have an agenda and like how you write about it. We worked at big companies, so we know how like posts get put up there. It's never the case of like, I was going to be straight with my customers. I'm going to be like, giving the real deal of what's happening. No, it has to be like couched in like many layers of like, some legalese, but also like various things of just, I'm going to say PM art. And like, how do you say something without actually saying anything? Whereas if I go to Reddit or Stack Overflow, I'm just getting the exact unfiltered version of it. Yes, grammatical errors and all, because that just makes it seem more relevant. And so, yeah, I do not work in the search area at Google, and I'm a beneficiary of the improvements they make, but I have no idea how it all works also. But I do if I look at my own personal bias, like what I typically click on, if there is a link for community or something like that, I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna trust a Reddit answer, especially in the last couple of years, more so than I am like a long, complicated article. Pick any topic, like what's the best light bulb to get. I'm almost guaranteed that once I dig through like all the advertisement-based links, that the first Reddit post or a post from some community where people are like actively discussing light bulbs because they love light bulbs is going to give me the best answer over that of anybody else. A company created a light bulb, they have an agenda, and so for me, community is just like one step closer to getting the real answer, as opposed to it being abstracted away by agendas.
And I think it goes back to also like what is a transactional versus a non-transactional conversation, right?
Yeah.
Like if KIRUPA needs to, figure out this problem and he does not care if it's a human that tells him the exact answer, go for it. But if it's like you said, what's the best light bulb out there? And a robot said, this is the best light bulb. You're like, I'm not sure I'm buying it as a robot who literally cannot see light, that you are
Yeah.
going to tell me what light bulb is the best, right? You want to actually hear it from a human being who has a shared experience from you, and you want the best human being answer about what the best light bulb is. And that's the thing about like these non-transactional conversations. You want to be part of more of those, and you want all of the transactional stuff in your life the day-to-day operations of like just solve this stupid problem so I can get on to the more interesting and creative elements. That's the stuff I'm very excited about AI really taking away from us. And on the non-transactional side, I'm excited about AI connecting us faster to the answers that we want to see from other humans. I think that is the future of AI on the customer front is, can we use AI to bring people closer together because we can unlock discoveries and give them upfront knowledge about the questions they should be asking and about like what is the background of this individual that allows us to suddenly go, oh my God, it's those moments when you're like 30 or 40 minutes through a conversation and you realize you both went to a certain school or you both know that certain person.
Yeah.
Is AI going to bring us closer together faster because we can suddenly see like all of the things that we wouldn't have been able to surface that quickly?
Yeah, imagine in some ways it's like a very powerful CRM. As I'm like replying to you, the AI could just like, oh, by the way, Zach went to Berkeley. You might
Right.
want to add. I'm like, okay, that's actually cool to know. Like, I can add these kind of details in. But what is your take on AI itself mimicking human beings? A common conversation that happens, especially among many forums, is like, you know what? Why have a community that gets like maybe 10 posts a day? Why not make it 100 posts a day where 90 of them are by AI assistants chatting with other AI assistants, and they're still adding valuable content. It's not like they're basically just, doing random things. They ask questions that are aligned with what your community is about. So if it's a light bulb community, it's like, which light bulb is better, LED or, what other kind of things. And then other AIs come in and reply, giving you the illusion of a lively environment.
So pretty much everyone I've met has a hardline answer on this, right? They either say, I'm so against it. I can't believe people are, impersonating others. And then there's either the other side where it's like, no, I can scale, so much further and so much faster. And I kind of sit in the middle. I think there are so many different views and takes on it. I think there are a few different ways to look at it. One is it's an incredible equalizing experience for a lot of people that did not come from opportunity. Like I am so lucky to have gone to Berkeley. I have many of the things that I do not worry about the same way others have to think about these problems. And so suddenly, if there is an ability for someone to, create an ad, for instance, where, they aren't a supermodel and people are like trying to see a supermodel-esque person, they can do that. And one would say, oh, it's unfair, but it also is an equalizing experience. It gives you accessibility to these tools to go and accomplish kind of things that you did not have the cards to go do. And that's pretty cool to see. At the same time, it depends on how you use it, right? I think the deception that can be created with these experiences, the number of abilities of actually do you want to be loved for something that is not you, right? I think that is something I ask every influencer is, if you could have 1 million more followers right now, but it was not you that did this. These people do not know you. They do not understand you. Would you still do it? And I think that is a tough question to answer, because some people say yes and some people will say no. And I'm not sure the people that say yes or the people who will say no will be happy with those answers, because the people want to be loved for being themselves. That is honestly what everyone wants, right? And at the same time, you have to grow a business. You've got to grow, you've got to move the needle. And sometimes it's hard to get people to love you for being you. And I understand the tension of the world that we have created, right? And so I sit somewhere in the middle there, Karupa.
Yeah,
It
I mean
is
that's the
a
best way to
case
do
by
it.
case.
Yeah, I mean, I struggle with this all the time as well because I like the authenticity of having real people post. But then I'm also like, wouldn't it be cool to just have like an AI profile, And I'll make sure it's very clearly labeled as an AI profile. So people are going to be like, oh, that's a real person. I'm going to like, give a credit card to this individual. But maybe like have that post like a question of the day. Like, hey, today's question is, so and so. And that has existed for years. I mean, Slack bots, pretty much do exactly like stand up bots, for example. Like, hey, what do you accomplish today? And so I think like there's a world where we can gradually figure out what this is going to happen. But I do stand more in the line of like, no, I'd rather have an authentic community than one where there's like artificialness in it. But then again, like you mentioned though, right? my needs for doing that are very different than someone who's trying to build up something very quickly to sell something and things like that. I'm just doing this for fun. My day job is not running a community, or its success does not hinge upon anything that's going to affect me materially in my real life. It's just something I always enjoy doing. It keeps me closer to tech and just allows me to chat with people that I've known for decades. And that's really it's kind of like one of those old coffee shops. You're like, who goes there? It's the same 10 people. I'm like, yeah, those same 10 people are exactly why the coffee shop owner maintains that coffee shop, not so that others will necessarily find it valuable, so that those people can stick around and do it. So I think that's a value to that one.
Yeah, and I'll even just say like the way I use AI, like everything I write is my voice, but I use AI to edit a lot.
Yeah.
It is a phenomenal voice to bounce things off of because it's not judgmental. It jumps in. It provides usually pretty useful feedback about things that you're writing, and has at times saved me from writing things that I just did not think about phrasing it that way. And it is getting surprisingly good from an EQ perspective at doing those things. And it's helpful, right? Like it helps me move faster in that sense. But at the same time, it is always my voice, right? Like I am always the one writing or creating behind it, because like I said before, I want, like all of us, I want to be loved for me. It's like such a weird thing to say out loud on a podcast, but you want to be loved for you, right? You want to be authentic and you want to be who you want to be. And uh, it's so hard. And I know there's so many people out there that are going to struggle with that because they will achieve a lot of success for not being themselves. And I think that is very tough, to be in that kind of place, because changing to yourself is very difficult. You see it with celebrities all the time. When celebrities drop a persona essentially and try to be themselves, there's a lot of pushback. People lose their original audience and they move to a new audience, and it is sometimes tumultuous.
Yeah, no, I've totally makes sense there in that world. So let me shift gears a little bit, and talk about Tightknit itself. I love the design. I love the design of your website. I like the design of all the communities. And so what's the thinking behind that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm very thankful that both me and Steven, I would say, like, have generally decent taste. Neither of us are designers. We have just truly worked with some of the best designers in the world, and I would like to attribute it to osmosis, that like just by having them have shown us great design and great user experience and great accessible experiences, that we have been able to pick up and understand it. Of course, we are like always thinking about how to improve design, but design is very much like at the center of it. And yeah, I mean, you are also one of those people, by the way, KIRUPA, with all the work you did on like design tokens. We have done a lot of that work. Like that is a lot of how Tightknit is built, is with design tokens and thinking in that framing. Um, but yeah, I mean, design is really important, and we think a lot about like accessibility even, right? We want to support a community. Should not prevent people from joining it because of the technology. That is at its core. One of our missions is to make sure that it's not the tech that's preventing you from joining the community. I'm not saying you're getting in every community, right? Like, sometimes you're just not supposed to be in certain communities, and that's okay. But it should not be the tech that prevents you from getting in there. And so that's been the approach. We wanted to make it very friendly. We want to make it very accessible in terms of like its experience, not flashy. That is something we actively avoid. Is we do not want flashy experiences. We want to make it so that everybody feels like it is an internet that they feel like they can belong to.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're underselling a little bit of it, but yeah, look at the iconography, look at the spacing of everything, and look at how well the posts are structured and response and so on. That's you did a very good job on this. I love geeking out on pixels. Like, no matter how much, which my cat, of course, also named Pixel, is like, for me, I'm always like, the technology is really cool, but how can I also make it look really nice? Like how can we make it aesthetically pleasing? Like kind of balancing all of those things is something that, in many ways does drive me. Even what I work on right now, we make sure that what we're building has a certain look and feel that is very unique and highly polished. And so when I look at Tightknit, like the logo, I look at everything there. I'm like, I actually spent a little bit of time like just clicking around yesterday. Like, is there any part of the experience that kind of got the, the kind of like the second grade treatment as opposed to like the first class treatment? No, like everything was well done. All the copy, the words, everything was like really well thought out. So I thought it was actually a very nice touch, and I wanted to like make sure you knew that.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's probably because both Stephen and I are very pedantic and we have these tiny little details that we obsess over. But at the same time, and I'm going to make this like the whole center of it, we listen to our community. So when they have like, hey, could this be slightly better? We listen to every little nitpick and we do write those down and we do try to improve them. We try to learn from like what could make this incrementally more lovable. And that is like, if you have feedback, please share it our way, because that it kind of goes back to like, how do you build a great product? And what most people don't realize is that the hardest way to build a great product is you have 10 customers who are not telling you something. Yeah. And they're just not telling you. It's, even if you go, like, you have to create the easiest possible channel and ability for them to actually tell you what's wrong, and you better listen to it and do not push it away. I think that is something that another problem is, just make sure they feel heard. It does not mean you need to go do it. That is a very different thing. Feeling heard and feeling understood is so important in this process. And if you can even say, we're not doing that and here's why, that is also pretty valuable. I go to a lot of our companies and our vendors and I give a ton of feedback because I know how hard it is to get it and give it. The best vendors that I work with hear me, tell me why they're not going to do that. And I go, great. I was just honestly throwing in an idea. It just kind of flashed into my head, but I still like the rest of the thing. I was just tossing something in there. That is community building. It is a trust between you and your customer, and making sure that they know when you are going to listen to them and go and do it, and listen to them and not going to do it. But the key thing there is you got to listen.
Yeah. And being a co-founder, being a CEO, being obsessed about detail is important. And different people have different things to obsess over. So it's good that you have a balance of things that you're focusing on. So that way the end result is highly detail-oriented deliverables.
I will add one thing, because I saw this the other day and I thought it was fascinating. Someone posted on LinkedIn and said, we're going to be a bugless company. If there's a bug, we're going to fix it. And I was like, my red alarm went off. I'm like, no. That is a terrible way to build a business. That is, and I've been an engineer, I've been a product manager, and now I'm a CEO. I know what brain is thinking. The engineer brain is very much built around perfection. And that is something I try to avoid too. You want to build this perfect product. It needs to have all the right things in it. It should not have bugs. It should be seamless. The problem with that is it's not the bugs you should be thinking about. It's your customer's experience of the product that you should always be optimizing. If those bugs are minor little details in their world, do not fix them, because it might be so much work to fix it that you're ignoring the lack of features that they need to go and solve their problem. It is that customer experience you should be optimizing for, and not the bugs. So anyway, I saw that the other day. I feel like you've got a great audience to hear that, because do not focus on bugs, focus on customer experience.
100%, because people at the end of the day, they're not waking up going like, I can't wait to go to a community and type like 8 hours of messages, or I can't wait to bring up my code editor so you can build an app for like 8 hours. No, they're doing this because they want to sell a product to their customers. They want to be able to get better insights into how they can better make their professional lives better or their day-to-day lives better and things like that. We're just the tools that people are using in between it. And yes, there is a certain level of like a balance between like visual polish, P3, P4 bugs need to be addressed, but the P0s are the ones that help them accomplish the task that they hired your product to do, the classic jobs to be done kind of a mindset. And I think that often gets lost. Small companies, big companies, they often lose sight of the bigger picture. And, and as you probably also know, is that, the more people you start adding to something, then your P2s now become their P0s, and now you're like spending time dealing with like how do we make sure their work is like going well, even though you don't really care about it because it's like, it's not the critical thing there, but we hired this person or we have this like person who wants to help and all these things, and balancing all that is one of the hardest parts.
Definitely. It's balance is hard no matter what. I think it goes back also even to like the big company that versus the little company.
Yeah,
The big company is just a different balance than the little company problems, right? Like you just both sides are difficult for different reasons. You're constantly balancing at a big company that you're solving a problem in so much depth, versus a little company where you're solving a problem and stressed because you have to scale it so fast and so wide and so far, right? Like it's like you're trying to solve all of your customers' problems because you're still in this growth phase. Whereas a big
yeah,
company, you have massive tech debt, right? And it's no business is without it because good decisions do not remain good forever.
correct.
Things change, businesses change, AI is invented, right? Generative AI suddenly comes up, and that work you did on the like 5-year plan for natural language processing can now be done for a tenth of the cost
Yeah,
and in one line of code.
yep,
Tough shit.
exactly.
That happens, but you did it right the first time. You just got to keep moving forward.
I mean, that goes back to your point about bug-free perfection. That is often the biggest hindrance to iteratively releasing things, getting feedback, and so on. One could argue the argument that was it worth spending 5 years on something if you didn't really know if even a single person would like it? I think big companies struggle with this all the time. It's like, how do I solve something for a billion people? When the reality is, you haven't even solved it for like one person. Yet you're over engineering, over architecting everything because big companies have distribution. Some of the big advantages I think companies have is that, like your Salesforce and your Googles, they have massive distribution because of just how long they've been, their name, and all these things. What they may miss is like, how do I quickly react to something that is going to be good, even if it means it's not going to be $100 million, $1 billion business in 2 years, but we got to start somewhere and be able to make this work. And startups have that advantage. They have that nimbleness of being able to be like, what, I'm going to solve this very niche problem. It's going to be probably only profitable for like me and three other people to work on it, but there's potential for that to become something big in the future, and that's a risk that many big companies are scared of taking.
Yeah, no, I think it is hard because the people that build technology are not the same people that have used to build distribution. Like the irony is that like you have your salesperson who can really hear the customer's problem and does not have the like clear mindset of always how to build a product, and you've got your builder who sometimes does not have that like customer relationship building technique. I will say that's the other thing about like having worked at Salesforce, right? Like going back to what we were talking about, like working at Salesforce, I got to see that actually from the inside of what does it look like to build a relationship based company where AEs would not just answer questions about like what Salesforce did. They would actually be able to help think about like digital experience problems.
Yep.
Um, I think the Salesforce can get caught up like any business in overselling their own software. But like the best AEs that I've ever met are the ones that sell their software, but they also sell other people's software. They're trying to solve a customer's problem and they're building that trust relationship. And, that's direct sales, right? That's not a community, but it is so important. That's still that human to human connection. And you can do that same thing at scale in a community where solving people's problems in the community space and I tell people like, look, you can let your partners and sometimes even some of your competitors in your community, because sometimes there are customers who are not right for you. And
Yeah.
those customers will bury you. That is the thing that is so hard. It's so hard to turn down a customer, but some
Yeah.
of those customers you have to send away. You have to say, we do not do that, and send them to the right place. And they will thank you for that, even if it's a competitor. I've sent many customers to competitors because they're not the right fit for us. Um, it's just it's just how it goes. But when I see a customer who I know is the right fit, I am telling them the truth. And then I can say, look, this is going to work really well because we're better than X, Y, and Z because of this reason. But when they're not, I have to push them away because it's going to be bad for them. And it's going to be really bad for me.
Yeah, no, there's so many horror cases you often read about. the kind of clients that on surface seem like they're fantastic clients, but they end up becoming a huge pain. Even though they may be paying more, but all that gets amortized in terms of stress and time and randomization. They're like, you know what, it wasn't worth it.
Yeah. And you won't know sometimes if it was worth it or not till after you're through it, right? This is
Yeah,
just part of growing a business, and it's part of early product market fit is you think you know, but you don't know. Um, you have to keep going, and you have to kind of learn from your mistakes. So I think that's no, there, I learned, I actually, I remember this from like orientation week at Salesforce, and I really wish I could remember who said it. So I am kind of attributing it to some Salesforce leader, but one of my favorite lines was, and I've kind of changed it to be my own, but there are perfect companies and there are companies still in business. Those are the two types of companies that exist out there.
so true. Well, Zach, it was great catching up, great talking about community and all the other things that we tangentially touched upon as well. Any final thoughts or closing words?
My final thought is good luck with your Dreamweaver migration. I'm wishing you the best of luck, KIRUPA. No, I think I just want to say, yeah, if anyone's interested in learning more about building communities, go find us at community.tightknit.ai. You'll be able to join our Slack community focused around community building. And yeah, I'm excited about meeting whoever's kind of the next big community leader out in the space, because I really do think it is the future of building a business. We say it every 10 years, being customer first. It's still the case. So it just changes how we do it.
Perfect. Zach, and links to everything that you mentioned, Zach, will be in the description of all the videos and interviews. So people can also
Love it.
click there to find it as well.
Cool.
Well, Zach,
And
thank
KIRUPA,
you
by
so
the way,
much.
thank you so much for having me. This has been a ton of fun to jump on and catch up.
Yeah, likewise. Likewise.